But unfortunately, my days of only halfway getting dressed and being in my house are probably ending. So this is my sweet dog, May. She hates meetings, so I'm going to let her go. But I wanted to introduce you to her. She's my favorite, and she's definitely is my good coworker when I'm home. I'm excited about the session for today. Of course, Vicki is one of my favorite people, and so I'm really honored to have her here presenting with us. Just quick things about Vicki. Vicki has worked in both the system and as a community-based victim advocate. She received her degree from Utah State University. She loves Logan. And she's also a hero. When I was talking to Maddie about what can I say about Vicki, but recently we had our children together at a resort and they were feeding carrots to horses, and my son's finger got stuck in the horse's mouth, biting it, and Vicki rescued him and saved his finger. So she is truly a hero and a really good advocate. So I'm going to just go ahead and turn the time over to Vicki and let her get started. But maybe briefly, most of you guys have probably heard it, but her position is a brand new position within the state. It is a new federal grant that was out and that we applied for and were able to get. So I'm going to let Vicki tell you a little bit about her position as well as she gets started.
Thank you so much, Rochelle. And I was grateful that I could save your son's finger. That was, yeah, crazy experience. But I'm so excited to be with you guys here today. I've loved coming and joining in on SWAVOs. And like Rochelle said, I am in the now position as the State Victim Advocate Liaison. And the easiest way, simplest way to explain my position is that I'm an advocate for advocates. So I'm here to help you guys have a voice in the process of being an advocate and in the criminal justice world. Also here to help you if you need training. That's why I'm doing this today, as well as if you have newer advocates that you want training provided. I'm happy to help with that as well and do mentoring, things like that as well. I have worked, I worked in a domestic violence shelter at CAPSA for 3 years, and then I've also worked at Sandy City Police Department for 9.5 years as a system-based advocate. And then a lot of you know me now as the grant analyst person. Did that for a little over 2 years within our office. And so I've kind of done a lot of random things. So yeah, but I want this to be as interactive as possible. I know it's a bigger group, so sometimes that's a little harder. There will be some polls and chat questions and things like that. So please feel free to participate, and please do. If you want to ask any questions, you can put them in the chat, and Rochelle and Maddie will kind of keep an eye on that and let me know if I am missing something.
That's all.
Oh, someone's not muted. And then if there are, like I said, if there are any questions, please put them in the chat, or if you guys want to add any commentary. We're going to be kind of doing 2 different presentations today. We're going to be talking about trauma-informed response, and as well as, I know it's a super fun topic, but it's important, is ethics as an advocate. So we're going to start off with our trauma-informed response, and I am going to share my screen, make sure I share this with sound. We do have a video later. Okay. Now I want to open. I hate when I can't see you guys anymore, but we're going to open up chat. And okay, everyone can see then that. Rochelle,
yep,
right?
Good.
Okay. We're going to minimize. When it takes you guys all away when I share. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So this is my contact information. Please contact me if you have any questions. So I feel like with trauma-informed response, you can't really talk about that without first talking about what trauma really is. I think everyone probably on this already knows what trauma is, but it's important to at least make sure we know essentially what it is. So trauma is often divided into 3 types of groups: acute, chronic, and complex. So you have acute as the trauma is a single distressing incident, like an accident, natural disaster, a sexual assault, or a physical assault. And this is something that's a one-time incident that has happened. The chronic is a constant, chronic is from exposure to multiple long-term and or prolonged distressing traumatic events. So such as domestic violence, because it's usually not just one incident, or child abuse, mental or long-term illness, like cancer treatment, things like that, or having cancer and getting treatment, continuous abuse, or those that are in war, in areas that have war. Complex is that it's trauma is exposure from multiple different type of traumatic events. So this becomes complex trauma if maybe you had someone that has been a victim of domestic violence that's been long-term and over, but then they have a new sexual assault that's maybe not part of their domestic violence encompassing, but a new perpetrator, things like that. Or it can be they've had, like I said, multiple types of traumatic events. So that's the very nutshell of trauma. There's a whole lot more with trauma. There's a lot about learning about how the brain interacts with trauma, things like that as well. But you guys have probably received some of that, and I don't want to go too much. We want to kind of talk about, now that we know a little bit about trauma, how we can be approaching and working with clients and victims in a trauma-informed way. So the important when having trauma-informed approach that you first understand that trauma. It's important always to keep the knowledge at the forefront as you work with victims, that a lot of times maybe the way they're interacting or responding to you is because of their trauma. Having empathy should look like what's listed above, so that you are present, compassion, I'll read just some of them, accepting, calm, engaged, attentive, trusting, listening, and having that being inviting. So you want to have that empathy when you are first doing that trauma-informed response. There's a great article with the Resource Sharing Project that talks about the different, actually it's focused on sexual assault, of responding to sexual assault, but I really liked this quote of advocacy is a partnership with survivors that restores the survivor's voice, choice, and power. And I just really liked that we can be the ones to be that partner. And a lot of times the victim or survivor in the victim justice world is having kind of everything happen to them, but really advocacy should be that true partnership. They understand their situation in their world a lot better, and so we should be part of that partnership to restore them back to a whole person. Advocates are the roadmap for the survivor, not the GPS system. They're not the one telling you exactly where to go, but they're showing them all the options of what roads and what ways they can go. It's important to help them on their journey, but not tell them exactly what to do. So we're going to kind of talk about, there's lots of different things with trauma-informed response, different techniques or different things like that, but I really liked this model that had just 6 basic elements of, it's easier to remember, it's something that a lot of us already should be doing and already do, but it's kind of easy to function on these. So you have safety, trust, and reliability, cultural relevance, collaboration or collaborate, empower, choices, and control. So we're going to kind of go through each one, and like I said, jump in if you guys have a question or if there is any things you guys want to add. So safety, it's important to have with safety. Safe relationships are something that you're a safe relationship, first of all, and they are consistent, predictable, nonviolent, non-shaming, and respectful. You want to be that model of a safe relationship. One thing that can really help a survivor calm down if they're in kind of that crisis is to offer a private space or let them choose what space they're going to be in, giving a clear explanation of your level of confidentiality. So I know that we probably have some system-based and community-based advocates on here, may have some attorneys or therapists or things like that as well, but it's important that the survivor knows what your confidentiality is within your role. So if you are a system-based advocate, that you don't have the confidentiality between the prosecution and law enforcement, but that you could have that, you're not going to be telling, your family and friends of what happened, things like that. That's not, but you're still going to maintain that confidentiality with the exception of law enforcement and prosecution. Sorry. Getting a little tickle there. If you're a system or a community-based advocate, You have a lot more confidentiality, but you do still have the mandatory reporting. So it's important to have that you give that clear expectation of that. One thing that can be hard to do, but being really attuned to their discomfort or distress. So when they are working with you, making sure that you are looking for the cues that maybe they're really becoming in crisis again or becoming really uncomfortable, and stopping and asking how they're doing, if we need to take a break, if they're talking about something really hard, talking about their trauma, things like that. Address their safety concerns outside of the space that you're in. So right now they may feel safe because they're in your office, they're inside of a police department or at a shelter, but making sure you safety plan and discuss their safety when they go home or they go to work or they go to school, they're in public. And then complete the safety plan that specifically addresses their concern. Safety is the first element you should address, and it's often what we need to focus on first. We're going to do a scenario. Excuse me. So this is a you're a system-based advocate in a scenario, and you respond on scene to domestic violence incident. The victim is a 32-year-old female with 2 children, ages 3 and 1, and the perpetrator is her husband and has been arrested and taken to jail. The officers have issued a jail release agreement. The victim has concerns about her safety after he gets out of jail, but doesn't want to leave her home. She's concerned about going to a shelter and that it could impact her losing her children. So there's a lot of things with this scenario. Yes, thank you for the poll. This one's a simple question, but is it likely that the victim will be able to focus on any other task while feeling unsafe? Just give another minute for everyone to answer the poll. There we go. Okay, now we can see you guys again. Okay, so most of you answered no. A few answered yes. So he or she might be able to go on with some other tasks, but if they are feeling unsafe in the environment that they're in or in the situation, it's likely that that's what their focus is going to be. So being able to address their safety concerns at the beginning is really important. Some of the things that you can do, minimize that for a minute, is, oops, it didn't want to let me go forward. 1 second. Is to make sure that you do that safety planning, but starting off to help them feel safe is to ask them where they would like to meet with you. So in this situation, you're responding on scene. So you're coming into their environment and you want to make sure that you are asking where they feel comfortable meeting with you. So you may think, oh, it's in the living room with couches, but that may not be where they want to be because maybe all their 2-year-old and 3-year-old and 1-year-old's toys are in there and they want to be in a separate room. So maybe the kitchen is more comfortable. So doing that small step can bring in that trauma-informed response of you are giving them that sense of control back, as well as addressing their safety because they are going somewhere that they're comfortable. Or it could be that the assault all happened in the kitchen, and so they really don't want to be in the kitchen because that's going to remind them of everything that just happened. So they want to be in a different room. So doing that, explaining obviously the jail release agreement and the other protective orders or what their options are with protective orders. Safety planning for tonight, for that, right then, the next 24 hours, and then safety planning outside of that 24-hour window of what they can do to feel safe. Even though at this time they don't want to go to a shelter, it's still important to explain to them what a shelter is and explain that process of how that would be, and that it's not necessarily something that's going to a shelter is not going to impact losing her children necessarily. It's more about her safety and her kids' safety, but that it's still her choice to be staying home. And then you want to tailor that safety plan to what her wants are. The other thing you can talk to her about is other people to be safe that she could go to if it's needed, and address, like I said, the protective order and those options there. Okay. So we're going to talk about, sorry, this one's going into my screen. There we go. Trust and reliability. So this is an important one as well. Obviously, all of these are important, all 6. But with the trust and reliability, you want to have clear boundaries and define your role as their advocate. This one can be a really hard one. I know that it sounds like simple in that statement, but victims of crime often have had very little boundaries. And so it's really hard for them to have boundaries with you, and they're going to really test the boundaries. And you sometimes may feel like you are failing them by having a clear boundary, but it really is healthy for them to have that boundary of what you can do. I have found when I would work with a case and I maybe went over and beyond what I normally did in my role, not necessarily expanding past what I do, but just like, for example, I had a case that I worked on. She had been assaulted by her husband, her hand was broken, she was in a wheelchair, things like that. And so I'd gone kind of above and beyond trying to help work with the social worker of getting her a placement of after she was in the hospital, working with them so that she could be somewhere safe. But she was very upset that her husband was taken to jail and he could no longer be her caretaker essentially. And I was the person she blamed for that. And so I had to have the boundary that I was there just to be the advocate, but explained law enforcement role was there, and there was other roles that took place, and the court was the one making the decision on whether he could have contact with her or not. So explaining to the client or the survivor is really important of what your role is, because they kind of just see you as everything. It's also really important not to be their friend or their therapist. That's a really one that can get blurry with clients, but they want you to be their therapist because they're in crisis, but referring them to what's appropriate. It's important to give clear expectations of what you're able to do and your availability. So although a lot of you are probably on call and available a lot of hours outside of just 8 to 5, but if you're not the person that's on call 24/7, having that's expectation isn't there. And don't make promises, give realistic expectations of the criminal justice process or victim services that are offered. Keep appointments with them and if you aren't able to, notify them as soon as possible and reschedule. A lot of times they're gonna not show up for your appointments or things like that, and that's fine. I mean, obviously we know that happens and that's just their life, but on our end, we should keep that trust and reliability that we're a reliable person. Maintain and protect each survivor's confidentiality, like we talked about with system-based versus community-based. That's really important. You want to make sure that you're not promising something like the perpetrator is going to go to jail and that they're going to stay in a certain time. Those are all things that are out of our control and out of the victim's control. Promising that they'll get the protective order, again, it's out of our control. Explaining the criminal justice process to them, and if you're a system-based advocate, and if you're a community-based advocate, making sure to connect them with a system-based advocate so that they can understand that criminal justice process, and vice versa. If you're a criminal justice system-based advocate, connecting them with a community-based that can give them more resources. Okay, so we're going to do another scenario, and we'll do the poll in just a moment. But you're a community-based advocate, and you've been working with a victim of stalking for the last 3 weeks. You've been assisting her in a previous stalking incidences, compiling documentation for her a civil stalking injunction, and you've been safety planning. You've spoken with her and met with her multiple times. She calls the 24-hour crisis line, so that is something that's available 24 hours, and is emotionally distraught. She tells you that the perpetrator drove by her home twice. You're encouraging her to go to the police to report the incident, or to call the police to report it and document the incident. But she tells you she doesn't trust law enforcement and only trusts you and wants you to come to the house before she will call police. So our poll is, go ahead, Maddie, you can do that poll for scenario 2, is it appropriate to go to the victim's home before she calls police? Okay. Give just like another 30 seconds for people to answer that. Okay. Go ahead and end that. Okay, so we had that 90% of you said no, and then 10% of you said yes. There's not necessarily right or wrong on this one. This is kind of more of a discussion, but I think that the biggest concern would be your own safety in going to the victim's home when she's concerned about the perpetrator being right outside, being passing by your house multiple times. That would be the biggest concern for you at the forefront, is that it may not be appropriate because it's not safe for you to do that. And then secondly, would be that you want to be building that trust with other partners that are going to assist her. So having that, she's saying she doesn't trust law enforcement, only trusts you, is not going to help her to have that you're the only person she trusts. So we want to make sure that we expand her ability to trust. It's still her choice if she wants to report that, obviously, but talk about your safety concerns, about you responding, and then make sure you go back to your agency's policy. If it's your policy, I know a lot of system-based advocate, it's a policy that when they respond on scene, they need to have law enforcement present. And that is strictly for safety reasons. So if it's your policy that you need to have law enforcement present when you respond or go to a victim's home, then you need to make sure that's your policy. You can, if you're a community-based advocate and they're calling this crisis line, and you could offer to reach out to the system-based advocate and have that they respond with law enforcement, or in that regard that they could go and have that safety be there, but they could be that go-between to help build that trust. You can also explain the process, give them the numbers, say that you could be happy to talk with the law enforcement that did respond if they decide to call, and give them case numbers or tell them about previous incidences with that victim's permission. And you can also offer to call the police and ask for a welfare check to be done on the client's home. Or ultimately, again, it's still her decision, but encouraging, if she does wanting to talk to law enforcement, encouraging her to do that and offer the ways that you can support that. Okay, so cultural relevance is you want to be open to learning and asking questions about a culture you are not familiar with. I still never assume someone's gender, pronoun, race, or ethnic background, and respect their chosen name or their gender, pronoun, or how they identify themselves. So this isn't something that some people get confused with grant reporting, that they have to ask for this demographic information, but you don't necessarily. It's self-reported. So if they want to self-report that they identify in a certain pronoun or gender, or if they don't, or they're identifying as a certain race, ethnic background, it's their self-reporting. But it's important to be educated on what different cultures there are out there. Take into account social and political factors of the survivor's life. So they have had a lifetime of experiences and cultural backgrounds or social backgrounds that are impacting this trauma. Educate yourself for resources for healing that vary across cultures. So there's a lot of different areas or cultures that have different ways that they provide healing. So there's different healing rituals or things like that that can be there. If English isn't their primary language, then ask if they would like an interpreter and provide one. That is something that should be, if you don't know the way to provide an interpreter within your agency, that is definitely something you should work on, and make sure you have something that's accessible to multiple language. It's really important to respect if a survivor tells you what pronoun they would like to be identified, that you respect that request and maintain that. I know sometimes that can be hard because it feels a little unnatural, but making sure that we really do our best to do that. And then educating ourselves about what cultures we maybe don't know a lot about, educating yourself. And I have found that if you don't know something about their culture, it's okay to respectfully ask them about it. So if they're, keep referencing maybe a cultural practice or something like that, so that you can better serve them and meet the needs they have, then you can ask them, well, can you explain that a little more to me of what that ritual looks like or what that is, so that I can make sure I'm providing the right services for you. It's okay to ask when you don't know, as long as you're respectful with that, and that you're earnest in wanting to learn and you're invested in their culture, and it's not offensive when you do it that way. If your agency is one that works with a lot of underserved population, make sure you educate that. So if maybe you have a large Latino or Latina type of population that you serve, then educate yourself on their cultural backgrounds of that. And then again, like I said, make sure you find an interpreter if you don't, for interpreter services, if you don't have something available. Okay, so we're gonna do another scenario and a poll. So you're working with a survivor of domestic violence and you are assisting her with obtaining a protective order. She tells you she's from India, Islamic, and that this was an arranged marriage. She is concerned about requesting the protective order and about the upcoming court case. When you ask her why, she tells you that under the Islamic law, it's difficult for her to file for divorce without the husband publicly agreeing for her to file for divorce in the public court. She tells you that if she cannot file for divorce, the protective order would be difficult to maintain and have it in place. So we're going to do this poll, and I want you guys, it's a multiple choice one, so you just check the boxes of what 4 choices out of the 8 would be more trauma informed and have keeping with the cultural relevance in mind. We'll give you guys a few more minutes. I'll give you at least 2 minutes on, or a minute and a half on this one because it's a little more to read. Okay, let's see how we're doing. About half of you. Okay, you guys are doing great. About half of you have filled it out. Looks like give just okay. Do you guys need another minute to finish? You know, this one's a little more in depth, so wanted to make one not just yes or no question though. Okay, I think everyone, okay. We'll go ahead and end the poll. Perfect, thank you, Maddie. Okay, so the choices you guys had in this poll essentially was that you could educate her about Utah laws only and tell her that Islamic laws cannot be addressed. You can contact legal aid services that usually represent on protective orders in your area and ask if they can represent the case with still aligning with Islamic laws. You stop filling out the protective order and tell her she needs to contact her own attorney before moving forward. You ask the victim if an interpreter for court is preferred or needed in her native language. You promise the victim that the attorney will be able to represent the case and get her husband to agree to the divorce publicly. You give her contact information for a multicultural center to see if they have any legal resources. You ask the victim if she is aware of anyone within her faith that had connection to address civil matters while still honoring Islamic laws. And you reach out to the multicultural center to find out what services they do offer and if they have any legal resources that addresses Islamic laws in local court. So you guys did great. I appreciate all the feedback or like the answers that you guys are giving. There wasn't necessarily a right or wrong per se on these ones. It just was what kind of addressing trauma-informed approach with that and understanding the culture. So I think you guys, a lot of you answered this last one, the 29 out of the 36, that to reach out to the multicultural center. So either you reaching out, giving her the contact can be helpful too. But I have found, this actually is a scenario that was very similar to one that I had in the many years as a victim advocate, but I worked with the client, and we reached out to the agency, the legal agency, to see if that was something that they could address in court before the court hearing, and that was helpful to know with what their regards or what their limitations were with legal aid. And then we also reached out to the Multicultural Center. The thing that was beneficial for me reaching out was that I then learned and educated myself on what their resources are. If you've already reached out to that Multicultural Center before and you understand their legal resources or the resources they have, you could give them the contact information. And maybe one thing that I have found helpful when I'm giving a resource is that if I actually know the resource and I say, hey, I know these people, or this person's a really great contact. Obviously we can't know everyone that works there, but having that you actually understand the resource instead of just giving them a number really helps them to take that step. Or you can be with them while they reach out to the multicultural. I think that it's great too to ask the victim if they have anyone in their circle that they know is already connected with that, so that they can honor the Islamic laws. And then the interpreter, I think, is a great one as well, to make sure that you're making sure that need is met if it's there. So those are kind of the ones that I would say were the top 4. Promising that this can happen that way is definitely not a good idea, not going to be safe for them, because we don't know necessarily if that husband's going to agree publicly or not. And then we obviously want to educate them about Utah laws, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we can't address Islamic law, because it's something that's at least we can honor it in a way but still abide by our local laws. Okay. So the next section or area is element, I guess you could say, collaborate with survivors to gain valuable knowledge about their needs and available resources. I think that this is a lot of times, sometimes gets kind of mismarked on that we don't realize that they're actually the first person we should be collaborating with. We kind of think like, oh, I always referred to myself as like a referral center. I felt like I was just kind of referring to a lot of places, especially as a system-based advocate. But I needed to, when you're working with them, you still first need to do the collaboration with them to understand what they actually need. Instead of giving them like, okay, this is the list of things I can do, you can pick off this list of this is I can do A, B, and C. You want to actually say, what kind of things do I need? And guiding them through that process of what they need. Approach available services and resources to partnership to best serve the survivors. So again, this is that collaboration piece of where you really do want to know, if you're a community-based advocate, you really want to be knowing and working with your system-based advocate to understand who it is, who's in that jurisdiction, who's working that. And if you're a system-based advocate, to really work with the community-based advocates so that you can, because not all community-based advocates do they need to have that the person is staying in shelter to be able to work with that client. They have a lot of they can do a broader thing, and they can also provide longer term resources for them. So having that partnership, and they have more people in their corner, so that then there's more people that are a support system and you're not going to be the sole person. Provide opportunities for the survivors to be with other survivors, so helping them get either into a support group or a mutual support group. Some agencies host those, can be really empowering for them to collaborate with other survivors. And then collaborate with other agencies and provide that wraparound services. Really, that wraparound services is what is going to get them the best service that they can have, and having that you understand and know a lot of the resources. You don't have to be an expert on every resource, but knowing what's available out there and knowing who you can collaborate, who works really well with you, and knowing those services can really help provide that. Okay, so we're going to do this as a chat. So I'm going to make sure I've got the chat open. So you're working with a survivor of human trafficking. This is our scenario. She recently was rescued from the trafficker and has been staying in a domestic violence shelter. She's from the Dominican Republic and not a legal citizen here. She's trying to rebuild herself back up and live independently. She can speak limited English, but would like to learn and understand the language better. She's expressed that when meeting with you. In previous conversations, you know that she may need assistance with getting a job, housing, education, and therapy. What other needs could she potentially need, and how could you collaborate to serve the victim in a trauma-informed response? So you guys can put this into the chat of what you guys think could be other needs knowing that she's a survivor of human trafficking and not a legal resident, and then ways that you could collaborate. What things have you guys done for human trafficking or other types of victimizations to collaborate with other agencies to meet those needs? So kind of put in the chat what you guys think other needs could be outside of what was listed, or how you could collaborate to meet those needs listed. And I'll give you guys a minute to actually type. Immigration and T visa, yes, that is great. Yeah, U visa or T visa, that's perfect, yeah. Thank you, Ruthie and Karen. Okay, refer to Dahlia's Hope for aftercare survivors, refer to English Skills Learning Center for English classes. Those are great. Thank you, Deborah. Help her find a therapist in her native language. That's great. Yes, I think that can be sometimes a difficult one with the native language, especially, but helping her find that and knowing where resources for that. Nora with the AG's office, she is great. Yes, she is great. Thanks, Sylvia. Basic needs, food and sleep. Yeah, I think addressing those basic needs, especially if they're in the shelter and they're wanting to get out on their own. ESL, job training and immigration services, establishing support systems. That's great. And Leslie, your office does warm handoffs, and we are system-based, so we let them know their available options and refer them to the appropriate agencies where we're limited in what we can offer. That's great. And I think those warm handoffs can be really crucial in making sure that the services actually get provided instead of just giving them a number. So that's great, Leslie. Yeah, warm handoffs are the best for sure. I agree. Okay, is there anything else anyone wanted to add in the chat?
Not necessarily in the chat, but maybe
yes, please, yeah, you can
if
do
somebody
verbal
wants
too.
to expand on kind of what those warm handoffs look like, if either Lori or Leslie would explain kind of how that goes for them.
That would be great. Yes, thanks, Rochelle.
Are either of you comfortable unmuting and just talking with us?
It's a safe space.
I work for the Refuge Utah Crisis Center, and so I talk to sexual assault victims a week or so after their assault. And if any time you can get that resource on the phone and say, hey, I know Lisa Levitt at BYU. She's great. Here's the services she offers. Do you mind if we get her on the phone and you could chat with her and set something up? Because it seems when people are in trauma and they have, you know, just a business card or just a number, it's kind of traumatizing to call and reach out to someone. And so it just seems anytime that you can kind of make that connection, or, hey, I know this person, they're so helpful. Here's what they do. Let's get them on the phone, or can I have them even reach out to you, or different things like that, then it doesn't seem as scary to the victim.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great explanation of it, of doing the warm handoff. And I think having that, you can help them kind of walk them through it. It still gives them to empower them to choose to contact them, but you're there with them and helping them do that process. So I think that's great. And go ahead, Rochelle.
I just kind of want to expand on this a little bit, just because we've, how do you get to know who is in your community? And this will kind of go back to Leslie. Do you have collaboration meetings, or we have a lot of new advocates, and how do they get to know other agencies to do these warm handoffs?
Yeah, if anyone wants to add on that, that's great.
I think collaboration is absolutely crucial in being able to comfortably do a warm handoff, knowing who is in your town. You can more confidently help your victims and reassure them. These people are really great. We've worked with them before, you know, give them their information. And then another thing we also do is we give them a call and just say, hey, just a heads up, you might be getting a call from this person, just so they can be more prepared to, if that victim chooses to reach out. So working together really helps us provide the best services for our victims, for sure.
And how do you build those relationships that you work with them? Like how have you guys built those? Like what type of
I think just like going around and meeting each other. We live in a pretty small town, so most of the time we know each other anyway, but we luckily have a really, really good coordinator who has been in the advocacy program for many, many years, and she just knows everybody. She reaches out to everybody. She helps the other people that we hire on reach out and get to know them as well. So it's just kind of that mingling, and you have to make that conscious choice to go meet those people, because it's not just going to happen in your day-to-day work time. So you just got to make a choice to go see what's available, meet people, and make sure they know you and what you can do as well.
That's perfect. Yeah. And it does take that extra step of kind of knowing what those resources are. So that's great. Thank you so much, Leslie. I appreciate that additional information. So yeah, I think with this, you know, with this case or with collaboration, it really is something that can be a great tool for you to develop those relationships with other agencies. So things that you can do in this, like with the human trafficking case, having, if you're a community-based advocate, obviously because they're staying in the shelter and that's how you're working with them, having a good rapport with them, with the system-based advocate, because they may be having, or the FBI advocate as well, if the charges are going federal, or there's, you know, going in the court system locally. Other community programs that can be really good to understand and be able to work with is Department of Workforce Services, food banks, housing authorities, or housing programs that are funded under grant funds. And then available counseling resources, like Kelly said, in a native language is really important and helpful for that as well. And then obviously crime victims reparations is available to assist with some of the expenses if they're a victim too. But thank you, I appreciate everyone's feedback and the additional information on the warm handoffs and building that collaboration, so thank you. Okay, so empower or empowerment is our next element. And this one is you are recognize that the survivor is a whole person and that you're seeing them on one of their worst days is really important. So a lot of times we get kind of in this, we get our blinders up and we're just like in our victim advocate mode. We're gonna do this and this and this, we're gonna help them this way. But really recognizing that that person that's in front of you, they are a whole person, they have a lifetime of experiences, and this is probably one of their worst days that you're seeing them on. And how those life experiences play into their trauma can be something that's very different for everyone. That's why trauma looks so different for so many people. So, and then, sorry guys, can't talk to you. Their victimization is not their only identity. So that's really important too. I think that's why we try to use the term more survivor now, but some people don't. They want to be identified as victim. So it's really up to them. But validate their feelings, beliefs, and their experience. Identify their strengths as you see them. I think that can go a long way when you, because they're maybe feeling just completely beaten down because of this crime that's happened to them or this victimization. And so seeing those strengths that, you know, maybe a domestic violence victim that they're just came to the shelter and this is the first time that they've left a domestic violence situation, pointing out the strength it took for them to take that step. Those small things that they have, because they are incredibly strong, as in general survivors are, because they have survived what just happened to them. Empower the survivor by validating their choices, even if you don't agree with them. This one can be really hard because we've had a lot of experiences with other victims and we've seen victims make those choices and it really didn't work well for them. But it's still the victim's choice. It's still the survivor's choice to make that choice. I know it can be hard in those circumstances. So it's really important to validate them and not put in your bias as well. Provide resources and services that the survivor can access easily to facilitate their independence and confidence. So we want to have like those warm handoffs are good and help them get that resource. And then we want to make sure that they feel empowered to continue to have contact with them, or they feel empowered that they can talk with them and have those accessible. So having those relationships and those warm handoffs help facilitate that as well. So something that can help too, like when a survivor is testifying in court, pointing out that that takes a lot of courage, and that to do that testifying, I cannot talk today, I apologize. But the thing that was really important to help them understand is that they're not going to be able to control what that the perpetrator may be pronounced guilty or not guilty, but their power comes from the survivor's bravery in choosing to speak. And so helping them focus on something that is within their control helps empower them as well. So having them understand that they have the empowerment to talk and be able to control their decisions and their things that they can do, but they can't control some of those other things, but the power comes from them choosing to do that process. Okay, so our scenario, this is going to be kind of more in chat as well that you guys can answer, and you can answer out loud verbally. If you guys want to on mic, please do. But so you're working with a survivor of domestic violence. He recently left the relationship and doesn't have any supports in place. His wife's family has been harassing him and further isolating him. He tells you that he feels like he is alone and being a male victim, that the other people don't believe him. He's concerned about telling his work about needing time off to attend the court hearing. He expresses that he's considered returning to the relationship because of the ostracization and the concerns about work. How can you guys empower the survivor in this scenario? And like I said, you can put in the chat or on mic, either is fine. Perfect, Kelly. Start by believing and validating what he's going through. Yes, for sure. Give him options and information, not tell him what he should be doing, but let him know what he can decide and what is best for what he can decide what is best for his situation, and you'll support him no matter what. Invite him to the weekly DV support groups or classes. That's great. Yeah. I think like we talked about with the collaborating back can actually help them empower. Collaborating them with other survivors. Normalize his experience so he doesn't feel alone. Yeah. These are great. Is there any other ones you guys probably are typing? I can't see if you're typing or not, but if there's other ones you want to, or if you want to unmic and say something, you can as well. Okay, well, I'll let you guys continue to add on there if you want. I'll kind of just touch on a few that I thought of. I really liked, Kelly, that you said, yeah, first off, believe him. I think that's really important to validating his feelings and connecting him to, like you said, Lori, the support groups of other domestic violence survivors, especially if there's a support group for male survivors. Emphasize the strength he had to come forward and report the abuse that's happened. It can be, I think, another barrier, especially for male victims, because of the stereotypes that exist in society, that there should be the strong one and that they shouldn't have that someone's abused them, things like that. But that can be another barrier for them to feel like they can come forward and report and feel believed. And then if he decides to return, respect that decision, that's what he decides to do. You can also offer to write a letter of support to the employer and verify, with their permission, that they're a victim of a crime and you're working with them. And then explore what supports he may have that he hasn't considered. Sometimes they're so used to only their little bubble of support, and that's been completely taken away from them. Maybe in that incident, like for him, he's feeling isolated and his wife's family was what his support was. So, kind of brainstorming or asking what other supports he's had in the past of ways that he can turn to for support. And then offer to attend court with him if he's nervous about court. Okay, so our last kind of element is choice and control. Choices, even small ones, are valued because the personal experience of choice builds the ability to direct life and dream. So giving the survivor choices fosters a safe and empowered relationship. A lot of times they've had their choices or their ability to choose things and control completely stripped from them. And so giving small choices can be really empowering. Respect and fully support the personal health care and justice decisions survivors make. So if they decide that they really just don't, after reporting it, maybe they just can't be involved with the criminal justice process, you have to respect that. Small choices like where, like we talked about at the beginning scenario with safety, where to sit or what room they want to meet in can empower them and gives them a sense of control in an area where they feel really like they have no control. And then giving them an opportunity to evaluate a program. I think a lot of times we can feel like evaluations or surveys are pointless and waste of time, but this actually can give, if you make them purposeful and useful, this gives the victim that sense that they have an ability to add to the program or to evaluate it and essentially say what worked for them and what didn't. So healing from the trauma is a primary goal of trauma-informed care, and our goal can only be achieved by supporting that whole person. Trauma-informed advocates provide options to survivors and respect what they choose because advocates know what survivors' decisions were not respected in the past. So we know that those haven't been respected, and that's why we want to respect them now. Assist the survivor in navigating what tools they have in their toolbox already and what those tools look like and could be used for. It can be uncomfortable for the survivor to have control back since that victimization took that control away. So sometimes they're really resistant to making choices or having that control back because it's just so uncomfortable for them. So that's why doing small choices sometimes can be really helpful to kind of navigate that. Okay, so this is our last scenario here, scenario 6. So a survivor calls the crisis line and tells you that she was raped by her boyfriend last night. She wants to know the process if she does report it and is concerned that she could be pregnant or get an STI. She's anxious about getting her boyfriend in trouble and about the court process. She's a student of U of U and living on campus. She wants to stay in school but is having a hard time focusing. She had a test this morning and couldn't focus well enough to complete the test. How could you respond with keeping choices and control in mind? So with this poll, what are appropriate choices and ways to give the survivor control? You could do the poll. I think it's picking 3. So pick 3 ways that you guys could give them choices. And if you're having difficulty having the poll come up or anything like that, let us know in the chat. I like seeing all you guys answering. It's awesome. It's fun to see all your answers. Give just like another minute for you guys to kind of read through and answer. Okay, I think we can. Yeah. Sorry if you didn't get a chance to answer all of them, that's okay. Just kind of put them out there. All right, so I kind of tried to do one about one surrounding the exam, schooling, and their core or like reporting it. So first one off was that you educate the survivor their right to a CODAR exam, and that she can provide consent all throughout the exam. So this one, a lot of you guys answered as one that you would pick. 31 out of the 32 answered that way. And I think that this is an important thing for them to know, that that's their right and that they have that control during it. Second one was you urge her to get an exam and tell her she risks losing all DNA evidence if she does not get an exam right away. None of you answered that one, which that wouldn't be the best way to approach that. So that's good that you guys answered that way. It's really hard for me to come up with negative ones that didn't sound too obvious. I know this one was probably a little more obvious, but you tell her that the university has additional resources with their Women's Center and could assist with concerns about schooling. Most of you answered that was a good one. This one no one answered, which I can understand why you didn't. So you tell her that she gets to choose if her boyfriend is arrested and goes to jail. We obviously know that that's not the case necessarily, but a lot of people think that that is. And then you explain the process to report the crime and that she can choose how involved or not involved she is, or explain the reporting process. So this is really important for them to understand the process, so they understand what it would look like if they do actually go forward with reporting it. And then last one that you could choose was you encourage her to drop her classes this semester and just focus on healing, which I think that the differentiation on this one I would say is that if they're wanting to drop their classes, then that's fine if that's a choice, but not necessarily telling them they should drop their classes. But if they feel like that's what they need to do, then supporting them and helping them feel like that's okay and it's not a bad thing to drop their classes would be okay to do. But just telling them to drop their classes may not be the best thing for them. Again, that's taking almost away their choice for that. But like I said, you can do it in a way that if they felt like they should drop their classes, validating that it can be and that it's okay if it is, and that it's not like the end of the world that they did, and referring them back to the university for that. Did someone on mic and wanted to say something? Go ahead. Sorry, I heard someone on mic, but I didn't know if you wanted to see. Sorry, Janice, I couldn't hear you very well. Go ahead. Oh, she muted now. Okay. Sorry. So is there anything else anyone wanted to add with this one? Okay. No, I love that you guys with that, I think. So in kind of going back with some of the things to highlight again, we've already highlighted the university and what to expect with getting the CODAR and explaining their rights, and then giving them the resources and choices of what our options are, and offering that advocacy throughout the process and connecting them either to community or to system-based advocacy. If she does report and does the exam, offering that to the system base, and then respecting their decision. In this situation, there's not anything that, I guess if she was underage or maybe something that would be reported, but since she was a college student, they're an adult, there's nothing in there that's mandatory reporting. It's still their choice on that. I just really like this quote at the kind of the end here, but at the heart of everything we do in advocacy, we find respect and caring. And I really, that's kind of what trauma-informed response, there's these 6 elements that we talked about, but it really comes down to that this is the core principle of advocacy, that we are doing everything in a respectful and caring manner. So is there any questions before we go on to ethics? You guys are dying to talk about ethics. Anything you guys wanted to add that you guys have found helpful in providing a trauma-informed response within those 6 elements, or just in general too, you guys can add as well. Just gonna switch presentations real quick. Did that switch over, Rochelle?
Yeah, I did.
Just want to make sure when I switched, didn't switch it over wrong. Okay. All right, well, we'll just delve into ethics then. We're going to be talking about ethics as an advocate or a victim service provider. Those are going to be kind of terms interchanged, and we're going to be talking about 2 different models, or 2 different agencies, I guess, that kind of put out ethics. So we're going to be talking about OVC's model of standards for ethics and also NOVA's code of ethics. Yes, and the slides for the presentation are in the Google Drive. And I think that that's given access on the invitation, if I remember right. Rochelle, is that correct? Yeah. Okay. But they are a PDF version of the slides. Okay, so we're going to start with something a little more humor here. I love The Office. I think it's a funny show, but I love this little video about ethics. So we're gonna. This song will be stuck in your head all day now. I apologize now because it has been stuck in my head for 2 days now from playing it. Okay, let me. No. All right. Hopefully that got you all pumped up for ethics now. That's a hilarious episode. If you guys want to watch a very funny one, it's all about the ethical things. There's some pretty funny ones in there. So, all right, so we're going to kind of delve into first the OVC ethical standards model. I'll click on this link just so you guys can see what it looks like. And then we'll go back, but this is essentially the site that has the different, and there's going to be 5 sections that they talk about within this model. There's a lot of things within this that are great to read. There is commentary that they add to each kind of principle or standard that gives kind of examples or things like that that can be beneficial. So I'll pull some of those examples in as I'm talking about them, but that's a great resource if you guys want to go to that. It's in the slide, and then I think Rochelle, yeah, she just put it in the chat as well. Okay, so I'm just going to do a quick poll, yes or no. Go ahead, Matt, you can launch that one, but have you received any training on ethics as a victim advocate? Just kind of want to know baseline of where we're coming from. Okay. Some of you might have not got a chance to answer, but that's okay. So we had about 87% of you guys have received some training on some type of training on ethics, and then 13% haven't. So some of this may be review, and please pipe in if you guys have. Okay, so families, gotcha. Some people message. Okay, gotcha. So anyway, so jump in if you guys have experiences or examples that you would like to share. You can put them in the chat, anything like that, or you can unmic and talk as well. So I know there's going to be kind of a lot of words on here, and I apologize for that, but I wanted you guys to have the actual verbiage that OVC provides in their training or in their models, essentially. But I'll be kind of highlighting some of that. Okay, so this first one is the victim assistance provider understands his or her legal responsibilities, limitations, and implications of his or her actions within the service delivery setting, and performs duties in accord with relevant laws, regulations, policies, and legislative rights of persons served. So it's a mouthful, but the main thing you want to know is that you need to follow your agency's policies, and you need to be updated and keep updating yourself on legislation and what applies with victims when you're serving victims, and also make sure you really understand mandatory reporting as well. But you need to understand what your area that you serve and what your policies are within your agency too. With the second ethical standard, the victim, so these are all about the scope of services, this first part, just forgot to mention that. The victim assistance provider accurately represents his or her professional title, qualifications, and or credentials, interactions with people, in their interactions with people as served and in the public advertising. So it's important that if you have specific credentials that are crucial, like for the, if you're a licensed therapist and you're seeing them as a therapist, let them know that you are licensed, or have it in your way that you sign emails or things like that. But if maybe you are a licensed therapist, but you're now not in that role as a therapist, that's not necessarily something that you need to let them know that qualification, because you're not acting as a therapist in your role as an advocate. But it's good for them to know what credentialing or what experience you have. But you don't have to like give them your resume. So that's the difference. So under the ethical standard 1.3 is that the victim assistance provider maintains a high standard of professional conduct. You should be respectful of rules and procedures and have appropriate behavior in court and with other professionals. Avoid having conduct such as violence, dishonesty, personal bias interference, and interference with administration of justice or abuse of your position. You should not use your position to secure gifts, monetary rewards, or special privileges or advantages. With that, the 1.4 one is the victim assistance provider achieves and maintains a high level of professional competency. So it's important to keep yourself updated on trainings. And if you don't feel confident in a certain area of advocacy, so maybe this area of ethics is not something that you're feeling really comfortable in, it's good to ask for help and ask for opportunities for training. So when I first started as a victim advocate, system-based advocate at Sandy Police Department, I had been working in a shelter, so I'd worked primarily with domestic violence victims and sexual assault victims. My first call out was an officer-involved shooting that ended in the suspect as a fatality. It had a domestic violence component to it because the wife was present for the shooting. But it was kind of a crazy scene. My first one, I worked in the police department. I think I was there 10 days when I got called on this scene. Called my supervisor because I still kind of shadowing her for on-scene response. She came out with me, you had the whole crime scene tape around. It was in the middle of a road, so we had crime scene tape all around it, kind of understanding and navigating how to work that new crime scene that I hadn't ever been involved in. We also had, luckily at my agency that I worked at, we had a therapist. So she was there to help kind of navigate some of those things. And it was really helpful for me after the call that I debriefed with them and asked questions of how did you guys handle like this kind of crisis in the past? We had the wife of the suspect went into shock. And so we had to get her medical treatment, but she also wanted help in giving the death notification to her children that their dad had died in the shooting case. So things like that. So it's kind of all new territory. And what I learned after that, though, is that I knew domestic violence and I knew sexual assault pretty well. I knew how to interact with them pretty well because I'd had quite a bit of experience with that. But I hadn't maybe with robbery or with arson or with this type of shooting or even human trafficking. I hadn't had a lot of experience. And so I really delved in to understanding those types of victimizations and broaden my knowledge and understanding of that, because I knew that that was something I needed to have as a system-based advocate, that I wasn't going to be just working on domestic violence and sexual assault anymore. It was going to be this broad. And learning more about child abuse as well was something that I really educated. Gang violence was another one that I tried to receive more training on as well. So it's important to, if you don't know something about it, it's okay. Just ask for the help or ask your work for opportunity for training. Did you want to add anything, Rochelle? Sorry, it looked like you maybe did. Okay. The victim assistance provider who provides a service for a fee informs the person served about the fee and at the initial session. So most of you as advocates shouldn't be charging anything. I hope you're not, as an advocate, charging for your advocacy service. But if you are like a therapist or something like that, you're seeing clients and there's a reason, or a legal assistance and there is going to be a fee, it's important to make sure that they're clear in understanding what that expense would be. The victim assistance provider conducts, so this is, now we're on to coordinating within the community. So the OVC kind of breaks it into those 5 categories. This is our second one, coordinating within the community. And you want to have that the victim assistance provider conducts relationships with colleagues and other professionals in a way that promotes mutual respect and, public confidence and improvement of service. So with this one, it's really important to be respectful with other professionals, and having respect for what other agencies can provide for a victim cultivates a better collaborative relationship. So having that respect for what another agency does, and that they may do it in a way that it's better than what you can offer because you have the limitations of your agency or things like that. it's good to have that respect for them and know that you can collaborate with them and be respectful of what they do. Point 2.2 is the victim assistance provider shares knowledge and encourages proficiency in victim assistance among colleagues and other professionals. So this one can be, this really kind of boils down to teamwork, and that if you have an area of expertise in victim services, that you share that knowledge with those around you. But you want to do that in a way that is not like condescending or things like that, but that you're open to wanting to share. A lot of areas that were my strongest as a victim advocate only became that way from learning from others. I learned something that I learned from other advocates in the community, and something that I learned really well from Rochelle was about boundaries and having healthy boundaries in the field, and making, like, I learned from her example of how she had boundaries with clients when we'd had overlapping clients that I talked to, but also from SWAVOs that she had presented at, or other advocates had as well. And then even on like our grant review committees, we were kind of talking about boundaries, and it was something that she probably doesn't even know this, but that it helped me kind of ingrained in me better healthy boundaries of working with victims, because she had a wealth of knowledge. So she was willing and always open to sharing that. And I think that that's helpful. If you have that knowledge, share it with other people around you, but in a nice and respectful way. Not enough.
Can I just step in for a minute there? Because that's, I think, boundaries, it's interesting because I think as advocates, we never want to be the person, because I still struggle with this of like, am I doing enough? Are people looking at me like I'm not helping? But how I always put it into perspective is, how can I make sure that my service is equitable? And if I'm going above and beyond for this one client, what's happening for the rest of the clients, right? Like, it's great if I am providing all the transportation for this one client to go to all these different appointments, but if I'm not returning phone calls for the other clients, then that's really a disservice. So I always kind of focus on like, what are our core services that we need to provide, and make sure that we can maintain that minimum amount of services. And if we have more employees that we can do more, then yes, then we can always build upon our services, but we should always make sure that we're at least able to maintain those services. And like returning phone calls are one of my biggest, kind of peeves. I hate leaving messages and things like that. So I always had to make sure, like, yes, transportation is important, and yes, sitting with people at their protective order are important, but if we're not even in the office to answer the phone, then we have to look at that from both ways. So I know sometimes everyone doesn't want to be that mean person that's like, I can't do this, but I think when you set those boundaries to say, I would love to do this, but that also means that I can't do this, and you have to just kind of weigh it out and prioritize it, that it's helpful to know.
No, thank you, Rochelle. And that's, like I said, that's why I learned great boundaries from Rochelle. And I think that system-based and community-based, you guys have a huge client base. So you have a lot of cases. I know with system-based, you have constant cases coming in, new cases every day. And you have court that they need to do and things like that. And so having that, you can't, even as a community-based advocate, you still can't be their sole person. You can't be the only person that they can reach out to, they can talk to. And kind of like we talked about with the collaboration piece of the trauma-informed care, is that you do have that they can have a network for their own selves, like they need to have a network for them. And so having that, you have that boundary, and having that sometimes as victim advocates, we want to save everybody, but that's really going to be a disservice to them. So we want to make sure that we are having that they have other options, and assisting people to make sure that they have that expertise in other areas, and learning and sharing that knowledge is helpful for them as well. So 2.3 is make sure you know what is allowed under your agency. The victim assistance provider serves the public interest by contributing to the improvement of services that impact victims and survivors of crime. So this one was actually kind of interesting. As I was reading through the commentary portions of it, it talked about different, being involved in different community events and things like that, or like not lobbying, but being there to educate legislation and things like that. And the thing that they pointed out was that you need to make sure that you know what's allowed under your agency and your funding source to be involved in the community and public to improve services. So a lot of advocates that may be VOCA funded, for example, we have that prevention activities aren't really allowable, but awareness and educating the community about types of victimizations and available services is. So going out and reducing harm by like working directly, like prevention is a kind of a weird one. Anyway, we were having this dialogue earlier today on the VOCA team chat, but it's one of those kind of weird ones that prevention is a word in VOCA that we're like, no prevention, but the awareness piece is there. And a lot of people, their prevention work is in the awareness. So just making sure you know what your policies are and what funding source you're coming from of what you're allowed to do, but it's important to contribute to the public and contribute to improving the system and that portion of it. And the way that we can, most people under VOCA, is through the education and awareness piece. But if you're not under VOCA, you may have other, then you're not as limited, but you have to still abide by your agency. Okay, so now we're going to be talking, this is kind of the bulk of the ethics standard is under direct services. So this piece, there's quite a few elements or standards on this, so we're going to kind of go through those as well. Okay, so the first one is the victim assistance provider respects and attempts to protect the victims or survivors' civil rights. So we want to make sure not only are their victims' rights honored in the court process, but also their basic civil rights. So they shouldn't be discriminated against. And I was actually surprised some of these I hadn't really thought of as under the rights, because you have like kind of the 5 that usually people say, but this one outlined even more things that they shouldn't be discriminated against based on age, race, color, national origin, including English proficiency, literacy, their identifying sex, gender identity or expression, sexual orientation, disability, their social class, economic status, education, marital status, religion, immigration status, or HIV status. So some of those were kind of interesting to me because I hadn't really even had it registered, like the ones that were for me, like immigration status I knew, but I wasn't something that I saw that as that in that area. Anyway, and then the things like HIV status, I just hadn't thought of it. So those are things that we want to make sure that they're not being discriminated from our end, that we're not discriminating because of any of those things listed, but also that in the process, so as you're working with them, that they're not being discriminated in the criminal justice process or within your agency. And then protecting the victim's confidentiality is important within your role as well. So knowing what your confidentiality is in the role that you have versus system or community-based is really important in protecting that. Under 3.2, the victim assistance provider recognizes the interests of the person served as a primary responsibility. So we should ensure that the survivor's best interests are served. If there becomes a conflict of interest with a survivor after you started working with them and serving them, you should make sure the survivor is aware and find them a different provider if it's feasible. If you're already aware of a conflict interest before starting to work with that client, if it's feasible, you should have another provider provide that service. If it's not feasible, ask the survivor if they're comfortable working with you and explain your level of confidentiality. So I know that this situation can happen a lot of conflicts of interest with rural areas or really small communities that everybody kind of knows everybody. And so there'll be people that are reluctant to work with a victim advocate or different victim service providers because they already know them on a personal level. And so if it's feasible for you to have them work with another advocate or another agent or another jurisdiction or something like that, try to go that route. But if it's not, ask the victim or the survivor if they're comfortable with working with you and explain your level of confidentiality, that you're not going to be going into the neighborhood barbecue and telling them all about what happened to them. You're not going to be spreading that outside of the need. If you're system-based, outside of prosecution investigation, community-based, obviously you have a lot tighter one. So that's one area that you want to make sure that you've identified and addressed conflicts of interest and that you keep the survivor's best interest at your forefront. The 3.3 is the victim assistance provider refrains from behaviors that communicate victim blame, suspicion regarding victim survivors' accounts of crime, I can't ever say this, compensation for past behavior or other judgmental sentiment. So with this one, you want to make sure your judgments go out the window. You don't need to have judgments, even if you don't agree with their behaviors, maybe leading up to the crime or how they responded to a crime. It's not our place to judge them. Being judgmental doesn't cultivate a positive working relationship with the survivor. So we want to make sure that we're not putting the victim blame. They're going to get that from other areas, and it shouldn't be coming from an advocate. Even as a system-based advocate, though, we may have all of the details and knowledge of what's going on in the case, so we kind of can see the aspects of what happened, and that can sometimes skew our view on it. But you're still there, that if the officer or detective say Jane is your victim, that's who you're working with, and you're identifying them as the victim in the case, and that's your lane. It's not really our place to say whether they shouldn't be identified as a victim or not. But we want to make sure the victim's very clear in the survivor that they aren't being blamed, or that we're discounting something that they maybe did in response to their victimization. Okay, so under 3.4, the victim assistance provider respects the victim's right to self-determination. This one has a lot of commentary on it that goes into determining self-determination. So if you have those that have mental disabilities that they really can't do self-determination, or you have child victims that are incapable of self-determination, you have to take those things factor those things into the way you're working with them. But in regards to victims that are able to have self-determination, we want to make sure that we're cultivating that. We want to, unless it's dictated by your program policy, victim assistance provider shall under no circumstances use ultimatums in the provisions of services. So example would be providing a service only if the victim or survivor of a relationship that's a violent relationship agrees to leave the abusive relationship. So having that they are leaving it and they're no longer working, they can only receive those services if they're only leaving a relationship. So those kind of provisions should not be in place unless there's certain reasons with your agency's policy. But victim assistance providers are also prohibited from intentionally withholding service information that might contribute to a victim's decision making. So for example, in a domestic violence situation, you may believe that it would be in their best interest to not return to the relationship, but it's ultimately up to the victim to make that decision. You can educate them about what domestic violence is and empower them to make the decisions, but you should, and you can definitely and should definitely safety plan with them of what to do if they return, but it ultimately is still their decision. In 3.5, the victim assistance provider avoids conflicts of interest and discloses any possible conflict to the program or person served, and also to prospective programs or persons to be served. So again, we kind of talked about this already, conflict of interest, but it can be helpful to consult with other staff or with your supervisor and determine the best way to address the conflict of interest. Or if you're not sure if there's a conflict of interest, talking with someone else that you're able to can kind of help navigate that as well. Under the 3.6, the victim assistance provider terminates a professional relationship with or a victim survivor when the victim or survivor is not likely to benefit from continued services. So this one can be a really difficult one to navigate when you may need to terminate services with them. So like, for example, if it's a shelter client and they're staying in shelter, and a lot of shelters will have essentially that the client signs an agreement that, they won't be violent, they won't threaten violence, they won't have alcohol or drugs on the shelter premises, and maybe they've violated those conditions, and so you're going to need to terminate that. It's important to make sure that you notify them, and if you can, in advance, and get them referrals to other ways. But if you do have to terminate services, that you do it in a professional way. Like I had an example when I worked at a shelter I was one of the weekend shelter managers many moons ago. And I had a client that was threatening other clients and had brought vodka in her Sprite bottles and was a threat to her. She was threatening to hurt herself and things like that. So we had to call law enforcement, get them involved. And unfortunately we had to evict her from the shelter. And we were, able to get her in another placement for the time being for her circumstances. She obviously was very upset about that, but I tried to maintain that professional, but I was indicating why I was doing what I was doing. And making sure she had at least some other type of resource to go to. And then it's important not to terminate services just to begin a personal or business relationship. So you shouldn't be ending a service for a victim to then have that you're going into a business with them or because you want to be their friend. Okay, we're almost through the direct service ones. Is there any questions up to this point on any of these ethical standards? Okay, just jump in if there are, please do. Okay, ethical standard 3.7 is the victim assistance provider does not engage in personal relationships with persons served that exploit professional trust or that could impair the victim assistance provider's objectivity and professional judgment. So there is a lot of commentary on this one as well on the OVC website. So I definitely recommend reading through that, going through that link that was provided and looking through all the different ways that they've kind of done scenarios and things like that or examples. But it's really important that we ensure that we're able to maintain objectivity and not have our professional judgment impaired if you're unable to avoid a personal relationship with the victim or survivor. So it's definitely strongly discouraged from engaging in a social or business relationships with either current or former clients, and know that it can be more difficult in smaller communities like we talked about before, but it's just important to maintain that professionalism when working with them. So if you've already had a personal relationship with them past and you don't feel like it meets the conflict of interest, or you're unable to find another way for them to receive services, making sure that you are going to be objective and provide professional judgment in that case, and be professional is what you need to make sure you maintain as well. In 3.8, it's the victim assistance provider does not discriminate against a victim or survivor and does not turn victims or survivors away from services due to their personal bias or lack of cultural competency. So lack of cultural competency is not a sufficient reason to turn a victim away from the program. If you're unable to provide a service, that's something I think that a lot of times is one that can come into play is with language barriers. So maybe you're not able to provide the direct service because of the language barrier, making sure that you find a resource or other options for the victim that can address and help them with, even when working with the language barrier, but turning them away from services completely or avoiding services to certain groups or survivors or a reason for cultural competency is not a reason you can. Under 3.9, the victim assistance provider furnishes opportunities for colleagues to access services. So this is essentially if you have a colleague that became a victim of a crime, it's best practice to see if another jurisdiction can assist them in the victim service process. But if to avoid that conflict of interest and so that it's more comfortable for the colleague. But if not, then you still would want to maintain, like 3.7 said, you'd want to maintain objectivity. But if you had someone that you work with as a colleague and becomes a victim, it's best if you can have another jurisdiction help them. Okay, so we've made it through direct services. We're on to our fourth ethical standard for the OVC model. So this one is about privacy, confidentiality, data security, and assistive technology. Another mouthful for sure. We've got ethical standard 4.1 is the victim assistance provider protects the privacy of the person served, adhering to the highest applicable standard of privacy. And then the second one is the victim assistance provider preserves the confidentiality of information provided by the person served or acquired from other sources before, during, and after the course of the professional relationship. So this one, it's really important to be aware of what your level of confidentiality is, like we've talked about before. And with both types of advocates, you should still get the victim's permission to share information outside of what your scope is that you have for confidentiality. And then with the 4.3, the victim assistance provider makes good faith efforts to ensure that the services are accessible, suitable, and secure for clients from a variety of personal backgrounds. So you should make sure that you're aware of the services that you need to assist with meeting needs for accessibility issues. So maybe if there's making sure that your services are suitable for someone that's has a disability, that's in a wheelchair, or is deaf or blind, or has a language barrier, or anything like that, you want to make sure that you are providing suitable services for them. Okay, So we are at our last one of the OVC standard, but it's the last portion is administration and evaluation. So the victim assistance provider reports to appropriate authorities the conduct of any colleague or other professional, including their oneself, that constitutes a mistreatment of a person served or that brings the profession dishonor. So essentially, we want to make sure that we are holding ourselves to a standard as well as others around that are serving victims to those ethical standards that we've talked about, but having that they are treated and respectful and they're not discriminated against and all of those kind of areas, and that we uphold other people who we maybe have seen not treating someone in that professional way that they should, an ethical way, that we're reporting that to. It depends on the authority. For other ones, most of the time you want to start within their agency, reporting to their supervision within their agency. If they have certain licensing, it can go through DOPL, but most victim advocates, it's not a licensing thing. But you would want to make maybe the agency or their supervisor aware of misconduct. Okay, so those are all of the OVC's model of standards, ethical standards. Do you guys have any questions or anything that you wanted to add to those ethical standards? Anything that you guys have had that has helped you guys maintain ethical standards? Or any questions you guys had on any of those? You could put them in the chat or you can unmute and ask. All right, you guys are a quiet bunch. Okay, so we're going to kind of go into NOVA's Code of Professional Ethics for Victim Assistance Providers. On this one, I'm going to highlight more of the changes that they've made to their, they recently changed it in January, February timeframe. We're going to, and Rochelle just put that link to that new Code of Ethics in the chat. And I will click on this link to kind of just show you what that looks like. It's a 3-page, this is part of their credentialing program that they have this code of ethics, but it's a good one to kind of abide by even if you haven't gone through their credentialing. So the poll that we wanted to do is asking if you've been credentialed through NOVA as a victim assistance provider. Just a disclaimer, we're not necessarily saying that you need to be credentialed through NOVA, just kind of getting an idea if anyone has gone through that process with NOVA. So if you want to do that poll, Maddie, thank you. Give another 30 seconds for anyone else that wants to answer. Okay. Okay, we can go ahead and end that poll. Thanks, Maddie. So we have about 80% of you haven't, and that about 20% of you have, of the people that answered. So that's awesome that some of you have gone through it. I'm actually looking at it for myself just to kind of have as a, and to kind of gain a knowledge of what their process is. Again, these are just codes of ethics that are a good tool and good to abide by in addition to the OVC model. But if you are credentialed through NOVA, you need to have that you know these new code of ethics, and then you can re-sign a form. When I went through the OVC's, or not OVC, I'm sorry, NOVA's training on it, you don't have to like submit a new signed one with this code of ethics, but it's good to have on file if you want to sign a new one, if you have that. So Lori's asking, what does that look like with Nova? For anyone that has credentialed, does someone want to expound on what that kind of looks like that's credentialed through Nova? You can put it in the chat, or you can open on mic if you want to, any of the 7 that have credentialed.
Lori
Great.
asks, what does that look like? And if I can recall correctly, Nova is also a 40-hour training. You need, I believe it's like 16 or 24 continuing education hours, and you need to pay a fee. So Utah has not necessarily adopted the Nova credentialing, and that's kind of our sticky point, is just that fee, that it's a for-profit. About 2 years ago, Utah started looking at credentialing victim advocates, and unfortunately, it had a lot of steam going into the legislation session, and then it kind of lost it towards the end. So I do think it will come up again, but I'm not sure when. I'm not sure if it will be this session or next session. And so I think from UOVC's like training, our training, the UOVC 40-hour Victim Assistance Academy is credentialed training through Nova. It counts towards those 40 hours. But we haven't actually, I myself haven't went through the training to become a credentialed advocate, just because I don't have any desire to leave Utah, and it's just not necessary here.
Yeah. Thanks, Rochelle. And they do have different levels of like credentialing, so you can go through, like if you've had, if you already have had so much experience or years of experience and so much training, you can apply to be credentialed as well, if you have so much training. So there's different levels that you can apply to be credentialed.
One thing that I actually thought was incredibly, this was now the only time that I was like, oh, maybe I'd like to do it, is they have this like board that if you have ethical questions, you actually can just kind of throw it out there to this listserv and they'll help answer them. And so I thought that could actually be a beneficial thing and probably worth the money that it would take as an advocate. But that's brand new this year or last year. So
yeah.
Can I jump in? This is Ruthie. I've actually done it.
Yeah.
And so it's, well, the one through the National Advocate Credentialing Program, which is in partner with Nova. So I'm assuming that's the credentialing you're referring to.
Yeah, they have the 40-hour ones that are can be used. Yeah.
And you can apply at a basic or intermediate or advanced advocate level.
Yeah.
But all of them require more than just the 40 hours. You have to actually have and submit reference letters. You have to record actual time of practice. You have to, it's an in-depth application. I think the benefit though is to try to give some, I think we've struggled as victim advocates to have credibility. And I think when you have kind of this certification, it's a step towards that. And I think that with what the legislative changes that Rochelle was referring to, and at least having the 40 hours and talking about certification, it just looked like this is something that maybe not just Utah, but other states are moving to as well. But I do think it's helpful. You can also apply, if depending on how many hours in your specializations, for special certifications like human trafficking, death penalty, capital cases, different types of cases. So you can also have specialties in addition to your certification. And so I just wanted to clarify that.
No, thank you, Ruthie. I appreciate that, have gone through it. So that's great. And we are looking at, like Rochelle said, with legislation, they had some things that they wanted us to look into, the credentialing. It is something that's part of my new position that we are going to be looking more at of what that would look like and what we could have in Utah that's feasible. I think the hard thing with once you add kind of credentialing and licensing is who governs that essentially. So if you have someone that violates what they're like, these code of ethics, if they violate the code of ethics, who governs what happens when they violate those. So that's kind of part of the credentialing dialogue essentially. But it's something to look forward to, I guess, or look for, because we will be having more discussions for sure on it. But yeah, these are essentially, like I said, these code of ethics are part of their credentialing, but we felt like they were a good base still for advocates, even if you haven't credentialed, to have these kind of know what these code of ethics are. So essentially, their beginning part does go through. So victims of crime and the criminal justice system expect every paid or volunteer victim assistance provider to act with integrity, to treat all victims and survivors of crime, their client, or in parentheses, their clients, with dignity and compassion in an inclusive, equitable, anti-racist, and accessible manner, and to uphold principles of justice for accused and accusers alike. To these ends, this code will govern the conduct of victim service providers. So that's kind of their caveat before, or like kind of their explanation of what these code of ethics are for and why they have them. Some of the things that they have changed, and I'm going to kind of, like I said, the things that are in bold and italicized are what they've changed recently. And thank you. And Rochelle put in an additional resource there for a code of ethics. So like I said, they've made their code of ethics to be gender neutral and inclusive, addressing issues of like racial issues and oppression. So they have part of that is added. So I'm not going to read through all these. You guys can read them on the site if you'd like to, but the one I wanted to highlight, they did add on number 1, empowerment, recognize the interests of the client and client empowerment as your primary responsibility. And I really liked that they've added that empowerment piece, that it's actually part of our responsibility to empower them. And I thought that that was really insightful for them to add that piece in there. And then under 4, most of this is new. I think before it had respond compassionately to each client with personalized services. That's how it was before. And now it's respond compassionately to each client with personalized, inclusive, equitable, anti-racist, anti-oppressive, and accessible services, recognizing the power and privilege differentials present within the helping relationship. So it's kind of a mouthful on that one, but I really appreciate that they've added, like Rochelle was talking about with that equitable, when she was with boundaries, like what's going to be the best, like overall to serve a victim. If I'm doing this way above and beyond, is this really serving other victims as well? I think that's part of that. And then I think that a lot of times we don't even recognize that as an advocate, we actually have an inherent power that the victim doesn't, because we have the privilege of education and knowledge of what victim services are available or what the criminal justice looks like. We have that we've worked with lots of clients, and so we have a base of knowledge and experience that gives us a sense of privilege that the advocate, that the victim coming through and working with us actually doesn't have. And so being aware of our own privilege that we already have just from being an advocate and in our position as a role, in our role, and being aware of that and making sure we're not trying to have power over them or things like that because of our inherited privilege. But also being, I think, the anti-racist and anti-oppressive the anti-oppressive can be difficult in working with the criminal justice process, because part of that has been kind of built on an oppressive nature. So making sure that we're aware of the way that the criminal justice process may have been built, and that we as the advocate aren't furthering that oppression. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so we're going to look, and with this one also with the Code of Ethics, they have kind of 4 ways they broke, well, really 3 ways they broke it out. So this one is in relationships with every client, the victim service provider should, and this is, or shall, and then this is kind of the things that they outline. Okay, and then, so this is again with relationships with every client. The newer one, so they do have accept the client statements of events as it is told. Again, this is kind of talking about when we've identified them as a victim and we're working with them and we're believing them. That's part of that. And then provide assistance to every client without attributing blame. Again, this is kind of repetitive of what LBCs is, that we don't want to put that blame on there, or have that they feel like we don't believe them. And then what they've added on number 7 is that fostering maximum self-determination on the part of the client through client-centered advocacy. And I really like that they added this, because we do want to center it back to what they need and their client. It's centered around them and not this is what the agency needs to provide. This is what I need for my grant numbers. This is what this is. We are centering it back on what the client needs. Mouth is getting dry. All right, so too much talking. Again, this is still with the relationships with every client. The one that they have added, number 10, is completely new. So they have in there the serve as a victim advocate when requested, and in that capacity act on behalf of the client's stated needs without regard to personal convictions and within the rules of the advocacy host agency. So with this one, you want to make sure that if you are advocating on their behalf, that you're doing it with their needs and not with what you feel like is what your personal conviction is against it, and then making sure you're abiding by your agency's rules. And then this one talks about conflicts of interest, number 8, 9, and then number 10 is new, that says protect client privacy and safety when communicating with clients and other service providers using technology, i.e. phone, email, text messaging, online chats, and video calls, working within agency guidelines to explain relevant risks to clients and mutually agree upon safe ways to communicate. So with all the advances in technology, we have a lot of different ways to communicate with victims, but we should make sure that we are communicating in a safe and confidential way and what's going to work best for the client. So it may not be best for them to do phone calls because that's maybe monitored, but maybe they have an email that's better or things like that. So making sure we can communicate in a way that is appropriate for within our rules and guidelines of our agency and what's going to be the safest way and something that the client agrees upon. Okay, so we have, these are our last 2, if I remember, yeah. Oh no, we have 2 more slides on with relationships with every client. So this one they have added, and I believe that this number 11, or sorry, number 12, the years is something that's similar to other service providers like therapists and things like that. But number 11, they've added that it's also with current clients. So establish and maintain professional boundaries with current clients at all times, including actively avoiding that dual relationship, such as a personal relationship, friendship, or a romantic, and observe the ethical imperative to have no sexual relations with current clients in a recognition that to do so risks exploitation of the knowledge and the trust derived from the professional relationship. And then number 12, what they've added is when interacting with former clients, refrain from personal and romantic relationships and observe the ethical imperative to have no sexual relations. And they've added this for at least 5 or more years after the termination of the professional relationship. And then recognizing that to do otherwise risks the exploitation of the knowledge and the trust derived from the professional. So they have added that piece that it could potentially be appropriate to have a romantic relationship with a previous client if it's been more than 5 years since you've terminated services, but that you shouldn't while active at all. Okay, last one on every client, last slide on that one is on 13. I really liked that they have added addressing our own vicarious trauma. So recognize the signs and impact of compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma and make client referrals as appropriate to other resources or services only in the client's best interest and avoiding any conflict of interest in the process. So I just like that they want us to recognize that we may have vicarious trauma with the case, and maybe that's part of why it's a conflict of interest to have someone else maybe serve them, or recognizing our own limitations. And if we need to refer someone to another agency or another resource, that we do that in an appropriate manner. And the last thing is then provide opportunities for colleague victim assistance providers to seek appropriate services when traumatized by a criminal event. So again, this is like obviously one that if you have a colleague that's been a victim of a crime, making sure you provide a way for them to get services, but it may not be with you. Okay, so in this one, this section is all about relationship with colleagues and other professionals and the public. So the number 2 is a new one, and it's provide constructive and informed critical feedback to colleagues when determined necessary for the betterment of services. So I think this one could get sticky if you are wanting, like I know with system-based advocates when working with law enforcement, that you kind of have to navigate that carefully if there's been something that maybe you didn't agree with the way the officer did something. I always had to take a step back and making sure that my biases weren't part of that, but that it was truly a concern that they violated a victim right or they did something that was unethical before I were to like go to their sergeant or things like that. But having that open dialogue with colleagues maybe that can help have constructive criticism and have it be that it's respectful still and dignified, that you can help them learn and have better services provided. So that's part of that in that professional. And then on the number 7, what they added is to act to promote anti-racist, inclusive crime and violence prevention as a public service and an adjunction to victim assistance. So they added that anti-racist and inclusive portion of it. And then you guys can read some of the other ones. I don't want to, a lot of them are similar to OBCs as well. And then in professional conduct. So this is working with other professionals as well, but just in your normal conduct as that professional victim advocate. We want to make sure we maintain high and personal and professional standards in the capacity of a service provider and advocate for clients. And then number 2 is new. So remain committed to their own professional education to ensure proficiency in services and adhere to best practices and evidence-based research. So I think that this one is kind of similar to that competency one that we talked about with OBC, but really ensuring that we are educating ourselves in what's best practice, what's evidence-based research, things that are helping victims, and really making sure that we raise that bar of helping ourselves know educating ourselves on what's best to hear victims. Again, they have the discrimination piece of it in professional conduct. Sorry, too many things. I'm switching to the next screen on. Okay. The only thing that they added on this one is just with number 6, they added the professional portion of it. But this one is, I think it's important on number 4 to not use personal social media platforms to interact with clients or to share client or agency information, which may jeopardize client boundaries, privacy, and safety. So I think that with the way technology is that we all have a lot of social media platforms. It wouldn't be appropriate to use your personal social media to interact with clients. You may have like some agencies may have like their detectives have a page or something like that, but it's not their personal one. If that's the only way to communicate is through some sort of social media platform, make sure it's an agency one and not a personal. And then it's important not to reveal or name other identifying name, reveal the name or identifying information about a client to the public without their clear permission or legal requirements to do so. So we don't want it, like I always made sure clients knew, especially when working in a shelter, and that I lived in the same city, that if I were to see them at Walmart while I'm shopping, I'm not going to acknowledge them. If they wanted to come to me and that's their choice, then that's fine, but I would not acknowledge them or breach that confidentiality that I knew them as a client in a public place. And then let's go to our next one. And then they've added in this gender neutral, so they changed on number 7 to their, so not use their official position to secure gifts, monetary rewards, or special privileges or advantages. I did almost show another office clip on this one that was pretty, it's a funny one, but it's slightly inappropriate. So I decided not to. It's keeping a professional boundary. But this one can be a really hard one with gifts. And what we kind of always had as our rule of thumb when I've been working with clients is that we're not going to seek out gifts, obviously, for that. And that if there's a monetary amount, like they're giving me a gift card or something like that, that I'm going to politely say, I can't accept that. But, we had someone that I think she was from Mexico. She'd gone back to visit her family, and she brought back little baskets. Like they were just these little tiny baskets, and it had treats from her country in it. They were packaged treats, but it was something that was really an emotional thing for her to give to us, to share her culture. And so it wasn't something that I was like, well, no, I can't accept that. And, I just said, well, thank you so much. You're so generous. Because it was more of a cultural thing than she was getting then to like give me a thank you gift card to, Starbucks or something like that. So it's really important to make sure that it's more clear that you don't accept gifts, and that you shouldn't seek out to get gifts as well. And then I think this one's kind of repetitive of what we've done at OBC, but report to the authorities any conflict of interest that prevents you from providing those services, and get assistance on that. So that is their code of ethics that they utilize. NOVA does, but I think there's some really good elements in there that can be useful as an advocate to utilize as well. And I didn't play the clip. Like there's a funny clip with the Pirates of the Caribbean, but I didn't want to provide trauma to Rochelle, so we just did the meme. But code of ethics is often the guideline. This is something that we should be making sure that we are being ethical in our interactions with clients. And essentially, if you are being respectful, caring in that manner, usually you're being ethical, but understanding what your code of ethics are and what's your limitations with your agency is important as well. But any questions, any remarks, or things you would like to add? Rochelle, if you want to add anything, anyone else?
Vicki, I just wanted to jump in really quick, if that's okay.
Thanks, Tally.
This is Tally, by the way. And I really do think that ethics, it's like there's never a, well, there is, but it's not always black and white, I guess. Sometimes it'll be in a situation. And so really have your good go-to check-in team, especially people who aren't afraid to call you out, be like, that's probably not a good idea, and have a few people to bounce off of. Cultural is a big thing too. If you're working with people, different cultures, like even just like a greeting, like a kiss on the face, that's going to be different. So some people might think, oh, that's really inappropriate, whereas that's completely normal. So just, I don't know, I guess sometimes it's not always clear. To just have your check-in team is maybe my recommendation.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Tally. And I like you said, the team is really important. If you don't have a team that you can bounce ideas off of, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can, if you guys have an ethical dilemma that you want to maybe run by, I'm happy to do that. And I have a team that I can consult with as well. So I know some system-based advocates, you're the one and only. So please feel free to reach out to me if there was one. And then we do have a survey in the chat as well. But is there anything else, Rochelle, you wanted to add, or anyone else wanted to add about ethics or trauma-informed response?
No, thank you. And I think this was a really good presentation. I think as advocates, the more we operate the same, the better expectations that crime victims can have. And I think that's kind of reassuring to know that if you are victimized in Bertle or in Provo, that universally you're going to kind of get that same continuum of care, and that we can, I can have this expectation that when I do that warm handoff, that I know what, is going to be provided, and that these clients will continue to receive trauma-informed services throughout the state of Utah. So thank you for being here. Thank you for your position. I think that is a very valuable position. And I hope all of you take advantage of Vicki. Just kidding. But you can now, because she has good boundaries. So she can tell you like when enough is enough. But
I probably won't answer because I'm not on call anymore.
True. Send an email. But if you have questions or if you need support, I think advocates and SWAVO has always been a team approach. and that we always want to make sure that advocates have someone else. So it's not uncommon for just different service providers to send emails to our team members, and we kind of bounce it off and help out. And so if there's anything we can do, we want to be here for you. And thank you for being at this training. We'll stick around for a couple minutes. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to do the survey. And mostly we would like to know what other topics you want to be trained on. So give us some ideas for the future.
And we do have our website is now updated, but under the training and technical assistance, there is a email that will come to our technical assistance team, which Rochelle and I are part of. So if you want to email that email, you can as well. We can, I can put that in the chat quickly. But there, yeah, we just want to know that there are resources out there. And like Tally said, ethics are hard because they are not black and white. Sometimes it seems black and white when you're reading that standard, but when you actually get down to an ethical dilemma, it can be hard to navigate. So we definitely want you to know that there are resources available. Okay. It doesn't want to let me go to work.